Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I notice you've been asking me that a lot more recently, and that either means we're doing more episodes or you're taking more of an interest in my mental well being. And either way, I appreciate it, buddy. Thanks. How are you?
I'm well. I'm not taking any more interest in anything that you are doing other than you being part of this show. So, yes, glad to talk to you. It's been a while since we have sat down and had a conversation, so I'm glad we can do that here today. Tom, I don't know if you're aware, but it is Oregon Week, or as we say in Ohio, Oregon Week.
Yes, my wife grew up in Oregon, which is a suburb of Toledo on the east side. And I said, "Oh, where'd you grow up?" She goes, "Oregon." I'm like, "The state?" Or because that's also not how you say it. Like, yeah, that's not as offensive to me as Versailles, Ohio, which is spelled exactly the same as Versailles, but pronounced not as such. Not like King Louis in what's her name, the one with the cake. Not like they would pronounce it. Versailles, Ohio. That's the one that remains the most offensive to me. But Oregon, Ohio, is a little like, oh, that's not right. That's not how we say words.
You say, what's her name? The one with the cake. And I'm thinking, Little Debbie?
Marie Antoinette. There we go. Now my brain's kicked into gear, and we can start the show.
Yeah, but Tom, you understand, we in Ohio pronounce all of the letters.
Mm.
So, the French can do what they want. Here in America, Ohio, we're going to do it the right way. So, Tom, it is
As someone who lives very close to Newark, Ohio, I can assure you that is not true everywhere in the state.
fair point, but we're not here to talk about Ohio or our faults, flaws, and failings. Instead, we're here to talk about the Oregon Ducks because it is Oregon Week. Today, Oregon head coach Mario Cristobal met with reporters, as did offensive coordinator Joe Moorhead and defensive coordinator Tim DeRuyter. Moorhead, you guys may remember from his days at Penn State as James Franklin's offensive coordinator, and 2 quick years, I believe, at Mississippi State. And it had been so quick, I had to remind myself: was he actually there? And yes, it did not go well. But he is now at Oregon, where you know there are worse places to be, especially for an offensive coordinator, as we know, and there are worse offensive coordinators to have, as we know. And so I suspect these guys will it'll work out well for everybody involved. But we got to talk to them today about the various challenges of the Ohio State game this week. But the main topic, Tom, was defensive end Kayvon Thibodeaux, and what's the update there?
Yeah, Mario Cristobal was asked, obviously, and he might not have even had to have been asked. He basically said, "I know you guys are all going to want to ask about Kayvon, though. So the update is day to day, kind of getting treatment. He sprained his ankle on Saturday against Fresno State. He was in a walking boot at the end of the game, which was like, that doesn't look great, but the X-rays were negative, so not a break or anything, just a sprained ankle. And they're going to kind of work through the week and get him treatment." And he was asked, if he doesn't practice this week, might he still be able to play on Saturday? And Cristobal seemed to pretty much close the door on that possibility. He was not, he basically said, if you can't practice, it's not really fair to the rest of the team. It's not, you're probably not in the best spot. It's not fair to the player. It's not fair to the rest of the team to put a guy in if he really hasn't practiced all week. So, he was planning to give another update on Tuesday or Wednesday this week. So we may know more shortly, but I sort of get the sense that unless you hear that he's on the field, until you hear that he's on the field for practice one of these days, he's not playing. But I do have a sneaking suspicion that as big as this game is, he's going to do everything in his power to play.
Yeah, and he's constantly getting treatment and working back. I saw some mentions and rumors that, well, he could have played against Fresno State. He could have stayed in the game if they needed him. And I'm like, well, it was tied in the fourth quarter, so they needed him, and yet he was still on the bench in a walking boot. So I'm not buying that he could have played, because if he could have, he would have, and he wasn't, so he couldn't. So we'll see where things go this week. They will be without starting linebacker Drew Mathis again. In his place is former 5-star all everything Justin Flo, linebacker. And they have 2 5-star inside linebackers, Noah Sewell, the other, where those two are, have all the potential in the world. But it was interesting to me to hear the Oregon reporters asking about like being critical of the linebackers and pass coverage, and it's just interesting to see media from other schools or other schools 5-star players not playing well and then being asked about it, and it's like, oh, it's not just Ohio State where linebackers have issues, or there are critics, and nobody's perfect, obviously, so you want to know, hey, why are things going poorly, and so it is. It's just when you spend too much time in a game thread, Tom, and fortunately for you, you're shooting photos. But if you spend too much time in a game thread, you get the sense that only Ohio State does things wrong, like incorrectly. Everybody else does things correctly. Nobody else has any issues. Nobody else has any problems. So it's always good to be reminded that, you know what, no team is perfect right now.
The more you watch a team, the more you can kind of pick apart its flaws. Just because when a baseball team, you're watching a bunch of other teams come in for 3 games at a time or whatever, and you don't necessarily see like the whole starting rotation. So you could see the top 3 starters and be like, wow, what a great starting rotation they have. And it's like, well, the fans of that team are watching that team every day and going, well, yeah, but the 4th and 5th starters stink. Or, once you get past the top 3 guys in the bullpen, everything falls apart pretty quickly. You get to, micro analyze whatever it is with the team that you were closest to a far greater degree than anyone else does. And, I think one of the sort of maybe not even secrets of college football is a lot of times fan bases of an individual team will know their team better than someone who's like a national reporter. A national reporter will have a good sense overall for, the college football landscape, but, team to team, unless that person is like someone who's living in that city, like, I mean, Bill Bender might have a better sense of Ohio State than you do, but someone who is living in, Dennis Dodd, who lives in Kansas City or wherever he lives, might not know nearly as much about Ohio State as you do. It just is kind of that's just sort of the nature of this. So, I mean, I think you go through and every year when we're doing predictions, I feel like I'm finding reasons to not pick Ohio State to go undefeated. And it is not solely, as you would always have the listeners believe, because I'm a hater, but it is sort of a function of, you have seen, you follow the team closely enough, hey, this injury is really going to hurt. Hey, this guy who they lost to the transfer portal, like that's going to leave a little hole in the depth chart. You know that more about the team that you're covering or that you're a fan of than the average person does. So then you pick that team apart a little more than you do any other team.
Yeah. It's like, all of the flaws. It's like when you're angry at a family member, you pick at their flaws to their face and you tell them how angry they make you and why, and then you try to belittle them. I mean, that's what we all do. Yes. So it's just interesting to me. The Ducks will leave for Columbus on Thursday. They'll land at 7 p.m., 8 p.m. or so, get settled in. Then they'll have a Friday preparation day. That will allow them time to acclimate to, playing at 9 a.m. body time as their body clocks are. They'll give themselves a day. So I think that's a tough ask. He said it's basically what they do all, like when any West Coast team comes over. It's just those West Coast teams aren't usually playing at noon local, 9 a.m. body clock. So it will be interesting to see how well they handle that. And they have scientists, they have all kinds of doctors and stuff that will get them ready in terms of, well, you need this dehydration, you need this, and we want you up at this hour, and we want you to bed by this hour. So they'll try to be as prepared as possible. I still think it's going to be a little rough. The coaches overall seem to have quite a bit of respect for Ohio State, which doesn't surprise me, and they should. But it's always interesting to hear other coaches, opposing coaches from major programs talk about Ohio State almost like they're different than, certainly different than anybody else in the Pac-12, where I think Cristobal said the entire against an Ohio State, like against an offense like Ohio State, your entire defense needs to be on point. You can't have busts. You have to be disciplined. Like any mistake you make, it could be a touchdown. And so, against an Oregon State or even a USC or a Stanford, you make a mistake and it may be an incompletion or it may be a 7-yard gain. You make a mistake against Ohio State and it's not a 7-yard gain. It's 7 points.
Well, and I mean, it's not just the level of talent that Ohio State has, because there are teams in the Pac-12 that have like 5-star skill talent. It's that Ohio State has so many pieces of 5-star skill talent, and you know, so many players on defense who are so much bigger, faster, stronger than just about anyone in the Pac-12. I mean, you got Kayvon Thibodeaux on Oregon as a defensive pass rusher, and yeah, he's like a future top 5 NFL draft pick. But Ohio State also has guys who are probably future top 5 NFL draft picks, and they probably have multiple of them. That's not something that Oregon's going to see every day. And coaches are always sort of incentivized to just sort of smile and say nice things about their opponent, because for one thing, you don't give them any bulletin board material. And number two, if you spend the whole week with your fans hearing you talk about how this team is really incredible and one of the best in the nation, then if you beat them, then congratulations, you have beaten one of the best teams in the nation. And if you lose to them, it's like, well, they're one of the best teams in the nation. Who would expect us to beat them? That's I mean, you're sort of incentivized to gas your opponent up a little bit, and that's something you're going to kind of hear. And there are varying degrees of eye rolling that go on when that happens. It's like before the Tulsa game, we're going to hear like, don't sleep on Tulsa. Tulsa's and it's like, okay, all right, yeah, okay, that's fine. They're not in Ohio State's stratosphere at all, and that's fine. Like they're a perfectly fine team, but they're not a team that Ohio State really needs to worry about. It's a team Ohio State needs to pay attention to. Ohio State is a team that Oregon needs to worry about, because, I mean, Oregon is a very talented team. They're one of the top 10 probably in the nation in terms of talent. But right now there's like the top 4 or 5, and then there's a big gap, and then there's the rest of the teams. And Ohio State is above that big gap, and Oregon is below that big gap, just in terms of talent, the scheme. Both teams are pretty well coached and develop players well, and the strength and conditioning coaches, staffs are good and develop players well. But just the raw talent in Ohio State is above that gap, and the Oregon is below that gap, and that's a problem. When you add the road, you add the 9 a.m. kickoff and all that stuff, and it's like there's some stuff that Oregon's going to have to overcome.
Cristobal said, if you're a real competitor, you always want to test yourself against the very best. And he said that you come to Oregon for opportunities like this. And I'm thinking maybe they should go to Ohio State instead, and then they can test themselves every day in practice. But, whatever. He did say it's a tremendous challenge. Oregon also recruited CJ Stroud, and he said they really wanted him. He has poise, accuracy, he's got good command. He can make every throw. He's really smart, understands protections, just a difference maker overall. Their own quarterback, Anthony Brown, both Cristobal and Joe Moorhead said he was solid, made some good decisions, needs to be a little bit better. But as we talked about in a recent show, he had like a 20 or 30-yard touchdown run where he looked to me like one of those old speedy Oregon slot guys, DeAnthony Thomas or whomever. It's like it was like, who is this guy? Because I just caught it out of the corner of my eye because I had it on my laptop over on the left. It's like, oh wow, if your quarterback is doing that, that's going to be an interesting test for Ohio State, because as we talked about on another show recently, like you don't see so much of the zone read and read option anymore. And so if maybe Oregon does that, we'll see how disciplined Ohio State can be and how well they tackle with their linebackers. And, that's where getting a healthy Cody Simon back in helps. But I don't know that this is necessarily going to be a battle of quarterbacks. I think, Tom, when it comes down to it, it's a battle of the front. It's Oregon's offensive line and defensive line against Ohio State's offensive line, defensive line. It's simple, but I mean, that's what happens.
That's how pretty much every game goes. Like if you gave any football coach the option of you're going to have a substantially better offensive line and defensive line than your opponent, or you can have substantially better skill talent than your opponent, they're all going to choose the line, because it's like, how many times have you heard games are won in the trenches? It's like this is one of these things that is a cliche, and everyone kind of rolls their eyes, but it's like it's a cliche for a reason. It's because it's true. Everyone says it because it's true. That's where and that's sometimes as with me picking LSU to beat UCLA because I thought LSU was going to have a substantial advantage in the trenches. Like sometimes you're wrong about how that's going to play out, and then you're wrong about how the game's going to play out. But then you looked at the Georgia Clemson game, and it was like, well, Clemson's offensive line is a little bit of a concern, and boy howdy was that a concern for Clemson. Like Clemson has a bunch of skill talent. Clemson has, a 5-star all everything quarterback, and they couldn't get out of their own way because the offensive line was just getting obliterated by Georgia all night. So that's a pretty good example of sort of an extreme example, maybe an outlier of exactly how much skill talent doesn't matter if your offensive line is getting killed, or if your defensive line is getting blown off the ball. It's like, that's great that you have these wonderful linebackers, but if there are offensive linemen pushing defensive linemen into their faces 5 yards downfield, like, well, that's still a problem. Even if they're 5 stars, that's still a problem.
I believe games are won on the edges, Tom. So as long as you can win that one-on-one matchup out by the sideline beyond the numbers, I think you're going to be fine.
Reminds me of the old World War I story where at the end of the war, troops are drinking in a tavern, and one of them looks at the other and goes, "Oh, who won the air war?" Like, yeah, that was not actually where where World War I was fought and decided.
No, definitely not. Joe Moorhead was asked about his experience against Ohio State playing coaching in Ohio Stadium. Said it'll be very challenging. It's in probably the top 3 of places he's ever coached in terms of the atmosphere and the difficulty. He said the stands seem like they go straight up in the air forever. It's a very, very tough environment to play. Now, the good news is they don't have to play on the stairs and the stands. They can play on the field, and it's even and level. At the time, it's a level playing field, as they say. But him having experience there and even having experience in wideouts can explain to a Pac-12 team what it is like to now what you're going to see when you go in the stands and you see this building. There's going to be a bunch of people inside of it. I know you're not used to seeing people inside of the buildings, but that's what you're going to have here on the road. And there's going to be a bunch of them, and they're going to be loud, and they're going to be yelling. And then he has to explain to them what yelling is. It's like an angry cheering, and it's loud. And so there's going to be maybe the first quarter where the Oregon Duck players are just adapting to the noise, and then it becomes a white noise, and then it's just in the background, and you don't hear it anymore.
And the one thing that's nice for Oregon is their starting quarterback he played in the ACC. He was a starter for Boston College before he transferred to Oregon. So he's been around hostile environments before. And going to whatever Pitt or Louisville is not quite the same as Ohio Stadium, but you have this is not a first time starting quarterback. Like CJ, he's literally never taken a college snap in front of more than like a few hundred people, or a few thousand people maybe. Anthony Brown's a little bit better positioned to deal with that. This is still going to be, this is probably going to be something that's a little nerve-wracking for Ohio State's players too, because they also have not played in front of a crowd like this for a couple of years. It's going to be a little different. There's probably going to be a little bit of an adjustment period and a little bit of guys walking out of the tunnel looking and going, whoa, this is a lot of people. Because there are a lot of, anyone who's a first or second year player on this team has never really played in front of a crowd like this. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. But yeah, if Ohio State, there's an interesting question about, okay, it's a noon kickoff. So how jacked is Ohio Stadium going to be for the start of the game? It is probably not going to be primetime Ohio State crowd loud, but it should be. You would certainly think it will be pretty loud and a pretty raucous crowd. And with guys having not had that for a year or two, like that's going to be something that they're going to have to adjust to.
Yeah, it's going to be twice the crowd they saw on Thursday. And you would hope that fans would be in the stands early and before kickoff rather than late arriving stuff, because this is the first time they've been in the stadium since 2019. So maybe get there and be loud and don't treat it like a typical noon game, because it's not. It's the biggest game of the non-conference schedule. And every year that's a big thing. And so you would hope that fans would be there well in advance of the kickoff, but we shall see. Moorhead was asked about Ohio State's defensive substitutions and does that make it more difficult to prepare for them? And he said it was, simply because you never got that much of a picture of the full defense as they will be perhaps against Oregon on the field together. So you never really got to see the entire combination of them playing together much. So that's a challenge to know what they can do, what they like to do. At this point in time, there are no tendencies, so it's difficult to scheme that up. You basically just have to do what you do best and then adjust to what you see and see if you can find some holes in the defense that you can take advantage of and go from there. And then it becomes the second half game and you adjust. We saw that at Minnesota. Ohio State was trailing. Then they scored 35 points in the second half. There's going to be some of that in this one as Moorhead gets an idea of what Ohio State does, and then Ohio State gets an idea of what Oregon's going to do on offense.
And one of the challenges to there is what Ohio State did against Minnesota is not what Ohio State's going to do against Oregon, because those are two very different offenses. And, we just talked about how fast Oregon's quarterback is. Well, Tanner Morgan is not exactly a track star for Minnesota. So you're defending a very different offensive attack, and you're concerned about different pieces of the offense. So that is something that presents a little bit of a challenge for Ohio State, but it also means Oregon has no clue what Ohio State's going to do this. You can go back and look at what they did last year, but that's different personnel. Like Shaun Wade is not here anymore. The whole linebacker crew is not here anymore. So they're really coming in a little bit blind as far as what Ohio State's going to do. So what you see out of Oregon, the first, you guys always talk about scripting the first 15 plays, the first 2 drives or whatever. They're going to do that. And they're going to put Ohio State in a bunch of different situations and see what Ohio State does when they go, they've got 11 personnel out there. Okay, now we're going to throw a second tight end out there. And then we're going to go 5 wide and just see what Ohio State does and what kind of coverages they're in. And then Oregon can adjust to that. And then Ohio State has to adjust to that. And it's going to be a little bit back and forth. So what you see the first 2 drives, it's like you almost go through the first 2 drives and then the game starts for real once the 2 teams kind of have a sense for what the other one's trying to do in this game, because they don't really have a ton to go off of before that.
Yeah, and against Minnesota, by the time those possessions were done, it was almost halftime, just because of how long the Gophers were keeping the ball. You would think with both these teams moving a little quicker, there's going to be more possessions. And so by the time things get felt out, then you can actually get to playing. Talking with the defensive coordinator, Tim DeRuyter, was discussing Justin Flo, came in and 14 tackles last week. And, coming in for an injured starter, Drew Mathis, and then gets 14 tackles. Explosive player. We Ohio State recruited him for a while, and everybody wanted him. I think at one point he was the number 1 player in the class. Can chase people down, and when he gets there, he gets the ball gets knocked loose. I think I said this on a previous show. They forced 4 fumbles against Fresno State, landed on 3 of them, recovered 3 of them, and if they only recover 2, they may lose that game. So they were hitting hard, and it was very important that they did that. There was some good discussion of Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. DeRuyter said, I don't know that I've had to face 2 first-round picks at receiver before. And I was trying to get an answer, trying to get a question, and I failed. But he was discussing how good the passing game is with those receivers. And then he said, what really makes it good is the play action. And I wanted to ask him about the running game, because that plays into it, and how, just how much more difficult that makes everything. Of course, I know what he's going to say, but I need the quotes for a story. But you can tell the respect that he has for the danger overall of this Ohio State offense.
And that was actually something I talked to Ross Fulton about on the Monday morning scoop, where he kind of did the X's and O's breakdown from the Minnesota game and talked about how big that play action was for Ohio State in that Minnesota game. Because that just, if you can run the ball and you can stay on schedule, and you get 6 yards on first down, and then it's 2nd and 4, then you have a real plausible thing where you can go up the line and the defense has to go, they could run the ball here. That is definitely a thing they could do, and you have to respect the run, and then that potentially opens things up in the passing game. If it's 2nd and 9, you're much less likely to be running the ball, so the defense is much more likely to maybe be cheating off of that. And, if it's 3rd and 9, there's almost no point in doing play action on 3rd and 9, because everyone knows they're pretty much going to have to throw this. So that opens up so much more in the passing game, but you have to stay on schedule. They did a pretty good job staying on schedule for the most part against Minnesota. When they get off schedule, that's when they had problems. When Minnesota was off schedule a bunch in the first half, and as soon as they got on schedule, like boom, they went right down the field and scored. So that's a big piece of, that's pretty much every college football offense, that if you stay on schedule, you're in pretty good shape, and if you get off schedule, it's a problem. So, that's not exactly groundbreaking analysis, but there's a reason coaches talk about it. This is the same thing as winning in the trenches. Like, there's a reason coaches talk about it. It's because it's a thing they think about, because it's a thing that matters.
And every coach it starts with stopping the run, no matter if it's Timmy Chang, Hawaii, or whatever. If you can just eliminate the running game, make a team one-dimensional, then you have a better chance. And stopping the Ohio State running game is a lot easier said than done. It's just interesting because they play mostly a nickel, I believe, Oregon does. And so, we'll see how that does against Ohio State's running game, but you kind of have to play a nickel. And and Ohio State poses all kinds of problems there because they start their three receivers and then they can go to 12 personnel out of, on the next play and go back to, whatever they want to do. And that's why DeRuyter is talking about it's about matchups as well. It's a challenge to have the right defense in there because they can do different things out of different lineups. And so they're going to have to do some things to make things difficult for CJ Stroud. They're going to have to provide some looks. They're going to have to do some deception and try to take advantage of the inexperience that CJ Stroud has. And maybe we see, CJ Stroud calm down at halftime, but I wouldn't be shocked if he has another, I don't want to say jittery game, jittery half, but as you said, it's a whole new environment. This is his first home game, 103,000 people there. And there's going to be a period of, you have to calm down. How long does it take to calm down? I don't know if maybe it takes him a half this time as well. And through that, you've got a defensive coordinator trying to make things difficult. And how difficult can he make them? I mean, they've got some really, really good athletes on this defense. And I just wonder how long it's going to take CJ Stroud. Is he done now? Like, is he done being, he's not done being a redshirt freshman, but is he done being new, and I don't think he can be just yet.
Well, you're still getting into some firsts, and you got a bunch of the firsts out of the way last week, but you still got some firsts now. Okay, first game at the Horseshoe, first really big national, game of the week type games. First time you're playing a team that has talent that is, pretty close to your level of talent. So, I mean, those are all firsts, and it's reasonable for him to be a little, amped up for that game. That's something that pretty much everyone's going to be. What he has to do is now go from it takes me a half to settle down to, okay, now you don't have the luxury of having a half because this is a better team than Minnesota. So now you got to, if you come out a little nervous, that's fine. You get one drive and then you got to settle down and you got to move on. And, Ohio State's coaches can probably help him with that a little bit too, where if you get, you put them in a chance, put them in a position to succeed, where if you can maybe you lean on the running game a little bit more, if you think that'll help, or you give him nice easy throws, get the speedy guys out in space, give him an easy throw to TreVeyon Henderson and see if TreVeyon Henderson can take a ball that's in the air for 8 yards and turn it into another 70-yard touchdown. Like get guys, you sort of get guys into the flow of the game with some nice easy throws, try and keep the chains moving with the ground game, and that may help get him settled quicker. It was, he seemed okay at the start. And then it was like, once you started to have some adversity, that was when he kind of looked a little rattled at times. And then once he got back on, once they got things kind of back together, then it was fine. And he looked fine. And he looked pretty impressive. And, you read the Ohio State, Twitter or message boards or whatever you want, and everyone's talking about how CJ Stroud looked terrible. And then you hear the national, some of the national people who watch the game is like, wow, he was really impressive. It's like, it's interesting, the difference of perception, depending on who you're listening to.
This is also based on 3 straight years of Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields, where it's not fair. Those are the 2 best passing quarterbacks Ohio State has ever had. So to then say, well, why isn't this guy in his first start ever on the road at night in the rain as good as those guys? You got to cut him some slack. Now, the Oregon pass defense, I thought it was interesting. DeRuyter said the secondary had some, I think the corners had some eye discipline issues and they were looking in the wrong places. The inside linebackers had some pass defense issues that need to get shored up. And he said that, and then you look at the numbers. Fresno State was 30 of 43 passing for 298 yards. That's a 69.8% completion percentage. So you could see, I could see Ohio State coming out again, throwing all of these screen passes that were successful last week, getting some first downs, moving the chains. It's just essentially a run play out on the edges, Tom. And as we know, games are won out on the edges. And so when you carry that out there and you get the passing game working out there, that alone can lead to some deep stuff. But if Oregon's pass defense isn't better, and we assume Ohio State will be able to run on them anyway, man, they certainly need Kayvon Thibodeaux to create some havoc. They need him in this game to be a Chase Young difference maker that, well, shoot, now our game plan is out the window because we have to focus on on one guy, stopping one guy. And we've seen the impact that Chase Young has had on other offenses in the past where nothing works because he just kills everything. And they need that from him this week.
Well, you go back to the 2018 season, and once Nick Bosa got hurt in the TCU game and was done for the season, and then Chase Young had a good start to that year, and then he had sprained both ankles at various times during that season, which is what Kayvon Thibodeaux has. You look at his game log, and it's like, what happened to Chase Young in the middle of the season? He started great, he ended great, but he was just like the non-factor in the middle of the season. It's like, well, he was playing on 2 sprained ankles, so that'll do it. And that was the point of the year when you saw Ohio State have pass defense issues. They didn't really have as much at the beginning of the year, and they didn't really have as much at the end of the year. It was, you gave up 48 points to Purdue, 49 points to Purdue. And that same defense in the Rose Bowl had Washington had 3 points going into the fourth quarter. I mean, that was a pretty good Washington team. It was literally a Rose Bowl Washington team, and Ohio State completely shut them down. Well, they had a healthy Chase Young, and a healthy Chase Young means all of a sudden your corners only have to cover for 2.5 seconds instead of 3.5 seconds. That makes a big difference. That gives the receiver a little less time to make that one extra move, or gives the quarterback has to anticipate a little more and maybe guess a little bit more. You can't wait till the guy makes a break. You've got to just kind of anticipate where he's going to be. That makes it a harder throw. So yeah, without Kayvon Thibodeaux this weekend, and we don't know yet. Let's reemphasize that. We don't know yet whether there's going to be Kayvon Thibodeaux or no Kayvon Thibodeaux or limited Kayvon Thibodeaux. I think the only thing I could say with great certainty is he won't be 100%. That's about the only thing I could say with great certainty. He's not going to be 100%, and he's absolutely going to do everything in his power to play. Beyond that, it's kind of shrug emoji. And if they don't have him, there's a drop off from him. I mean, and I'm sure Oregon fans will be racing to tell me about all the other great players they have, but those same Oregon fans are also the ones who are racing to tell me that he's going to be the first overall draft pick in the NFL, which I don't think they have very many of those on the defensive line outside of him. So that would be a big loss if he's not 100%, not able to go at all. And that's something that, I don't know that they can, they've got a couple defensive backs coming back this week. So potentially that helps. Just like potentially, if Sevyn Banks and Cam Brown can come back, that would help Ohio State. But it doesn't necessarily completely solve the issue. And Kayvon Thibodeaux would go a long way towards potentially solving that issue. But we don't know yet how much he's going to be able to do.
Yeah, and we don't know how tender his ankle will be, even if he can play, and how long will he be able to keep at it. I think that'll do it, Tom. You got anything else today before we call it a show?
No, just looking forward to. I'm really excited for this weekend. This has been one of those non-conference series you kind of had scheduled, circled on the schedule for years and years and years, and then last year we didn't get to go because of all of the things that you already know about. So we didn't get to go do. That was one of the trips I was really looking forward to, out to Eugene. We didn't get to make that one, but this weekend a return trip from the Ducks should be a really fun matchup to see. 2 top 10 teams, and whoever wins, this is a game you're going to be hearing about a lot throughout the fall. This is a narrative shaping game in terms of conferences, in terms of teams, in terms of the playoff. This is a very big deal game this weekend, and I am really excited that we finally get to see these teams play again.
As am I. I assume we'll be on campus by 8 a.m, just because it's a noon game, first game of the year. I just want to be there and experience all of it, and not be driving into a ghost town for a game for a change. It'll be nice. I'm looking forward to it. I wouldn't even, I wouldn't even say no to a little bit of traffic on 315, but I will leave early enough. So hopefully that won't happen, but that will do it for today's show. Want to thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. As always, check out BuckeyeScoop.com. If you're not yet a member, please become one. If you are a member, we thank you very much. You can also find this video and all kinds of videos like it at youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. Got all kinds of interviews, highlights, podcasts, everything you could want right there. So check that out. And we will talk to you guys later.